tuned to Salam Media, and I'm your host for this mid morning segment. It's Mariam Mia, and as mentioned, now we are going to be discussing the regulations from the department that vaccines are to be compulsory for entrance into schools, and this has created a lot of concern, and also a lot of parents, including mothers, who have taken mothers as advocates, you don't mess with us because we fight the good fight from the Women's March those years ago up to now. We always fight the good fight for our children, for our progeny, and this is our legacy. And hence, we're having this discussion because I came across this letter that was sent email to our education minister, and it's from a renowned family physician, Dr. Rapiti, who is a family physician, child and mental health, addiction, and relationship counselor as well. And he starts off by saying, "Dear Minister Horube, I write to you not merely as a family a physician with decades of clinical experience, but as a citizen deeply committed to the constitutional principles that underpin the ethical standards that guide our medical profession. In light of recent developments, including the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services initiating trials to evaluate the full vaccine schedule due to rising autism rates, I submit the enclosed formal objection to any compulsory vaccination mandate proposed by your department. The recent proposals and policies enforcing compulsory vaccination within the educational institutions raise grave concerns, both legally and ethically. I acknowledge that you have taken the best interests of learners into consideration before arriving at this decision. Nonetheless, I feel it is a moral obligation to alert you to the inherent flaws and constitutional risk embedded in such a mandate. This letter is not intended to be combative, but rather a principal appeal for reflection, transparency, and accountability. So I'm going to leave it there, and then we're going to chat to Dr. Rapiti more about his concerns, both from a medical perspective and then also from a legal constitutional perspective. And thereafter, so I'm going to have Dr. Rapiti giving us his medical concerns, but then we have advocate and a medical activist who is advocate Sabelo Sibanda, who then we're going to have the conversation with him regarding the constitutional legality of such a proposal by the Department of Education. So welcome, Dr. Rapiti, to Salam Media. Good to have you on air, and thank you for your time.
Hi, good morning, Mariam, and to your listeners. Thank you for having me and for this very important topic. I'll be glad to be joining you.
Thank you. So tell me, what is wrong with this requirement by the Department of Education? And in this question, I'd like to also ask you, is the Department of Education qualified to make vaccines compulsory? Do they have the authority and power over over parents regarding a child's health? And then what are the issues about this requirement that concern you as a doctor?
Okay, first of all, I really don't think at all that the education department is qualified from a health point of view to make such a declaration because you need a good medical background. No matter they more linked to education, and I would imagine that they have consulted the health department to make such a decision. But nonetheless, I think stakeholders must be considered. Secondly, my concern is that you cannot make vaccines mandatory because it's a whatever one wants to call them or however one wants to treat them. It is a drug, and if you go according to the Constitution, an individual is constitutionally protected to not take a substance that they're not sure of. And in the case of vaccines, there's been a huge debate ever since COVID And we will come to that point about the training of doctors on vaccines. But what we do know is that vaccines have not been thoroughly tested. And I think people have reservations because there's been a huge debate of in terms of the side effects of vaccines. They are very often downplayed. And as you might know, Mariam, during the COVID pandemic, when they released the vaccine, they said was safe and effective. Well, depending on who you're going to listen to, there have been nothing less than between 17 million to 30 million people who died from the COVID vaccine. So this, I need to bring in this point here, and that is the thing called vaccine hesitancy and vaccine skepticism. The difference is when you use the word hesitancy, you talk about something that's not sure. Skepticism is somebody that inquires intelligently, what are you giving it to me? Why are you giving it to me? And there are a lot of boxes that need to be ticked before you give any medication to anybody. And that goes for vaccines. What are the tests for it? What are the benefits of the vaccines? What are the side effects? What are the ingredients of the vaccine? And what are the recourse in terms of a side effect taking place? As you might know, that there is a huge debate in the US now with the HHS under Robert Kennedy, who's the secretary of the HHS, where he is now uh, going through all the vaccines that are on the CDC schedule. They want to review them. And I think it's quite right that vaccines be tested, and we need to be absolutely sure that they're safe and effective. And this is coming largely on the backdrop of the huge raise of autism in children in the US. Back in the 90s or 80s, they only had about 5 or 6 vaccines like we do here. Right now, that's shot up to 56 or 60 vaccines. And we have found from 1980, the incidence of autism was 1 in about 10,000. It's now spiraled to 1 in 30. I think we need to understand what a big number that is. That's in any class of 30, you've got one child with autism. That's almost 33, that's about 3%. And that's very, very high. I'm not saying vaccines are the cause, but there seem to be some spatial or temporal correlation. I mean, if you look at the rest of the world where vaccination is not so common, I don't think we see so much of autism. And there's other core problems, and that is ADHD that's on the rise. And another big concern for me is that how many of these vaccines that we are using are being tested. And because I was read a book called Turtles All the Way Down, and in there, the authors have done immense research to show that the information given about vaccines has been not very trustworthy. I mean, there haven't been proper tests. Like Edward Jenner, it goes back to smallpox. Edward Jenner didn't do any basic studies as such, to prove his theory, but it worked at the time. But nevertheless, smallpox was so-called eradicated at that time, we've done away with it. And here's a good example. We've eradicated it, so we don't use a vaccine. We haven't appraised the current role of vaccines at the moment. How many of them do we really need? These questions need to be answered, and they haven't been answered. And my take as a family doctor is that medicines are your last choice in treating any condition. I'm a lifestyle management doctor because every medicine, every drug, as much as good as it may be, comes with a side effect. And I'm more in favor of natural immunity for most common illnesses like influenza. They're self-limiting. I mean, they've done the study with, for example, influenza, and you have medical aids pushing and getting doctors to give vaccinations for children or for flu vaccinations. And there's been a study to show that 69 to 74% had tested positive for a rhinovirus, but they were totally asymptomatic. In other words, you could have an infection. It's not serious. And if it's self-limiting, we don't need outside interventions like a vaccine. What I
So,
mean by
Dr.
that,
Rapiti, I just want to ask you, you say as a practitioner, I've witnessed firsthand the consequences of one size fits all mandates. I've treated patients, children included, who's suffered adverse effects, and I've seen the erosion of trust between families and institutions that once stood as pillars of care. Informed consent is not a bureaucratic formality, it is an ethical cornerstone of medical practice. So, based on this, what I want to ask you is, if I come in for consult, and even if I have a flu, or let's say I have a throat infection that requires antibiotics, you will first, or you mandated to, in part of your training, to ask me, are you allergic to maybe penicillin or to sulfur or something, before you decide what treatment regimen or what medication to prescribe for me. So you have this better understanding of my body, what I may be allergic to, what my constraints are. Now, when it comes to vaccination, um, it's basically a different type, but it's still a treatment regimen. And even if it's preventative beforehand, we're doing it. Is there a consultative process? So when I come in, or as a parent, I bring my child, is there a questionnaire or a consultation to say, uh, does your child suffer from what allergies? Are they allergic to anything? Do they have any pre existing health conditions? Or is it just jab, 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 jab? And what happens like this? Because then how are we going to know where? How are we going to do away this one size fits all? Because surely some people will have and might have an adverse reaction to some type of composition that is in those vaccines there, so they can't take certain things. So, do we have such type of screening prior to a vaccine given currently that you're aware of?
yeah, Mariam, it's a very loaded question, but I think I want to touch on a very serious topic here, and that is, I think parents have a right to decide whether they want vaccines or not. And it's not, I think we must stop underestimating the public as being stupid, that you need a medical degree to know things. All you need is a brain that's intelligent enough to read and understand things. There's been enough, we haven't done enough studies to show what are the effects of children who don't get vaccinated. It doesn't mean to say that you're not protected. I mean, if you get exposed to when I was in med school, they used to talk about, I'm talking about 50 years ago, there was a thing called mumps party, where you encourage children at a very young age to go to a party where there are other kids who had mumps. So you had uh, got the infection, and if you got it as a child, then you got good, solid protection against mumps, because natural immunity, but there's a thing called Rule 101, which says categorically, and this is accepted by all good ethical virologists and epidemiologists, that natural immunity by far is the best. So when children get exposed to mild infections, they are got good immunity, they're going to build immunity against it, than to take an artificial vaccine or one that is prepared. Now, what's coming out? There is I forget the name of the group in America. There's a religious sect that have not used the vaccines,
This is the
and
Mormon group, right?
that's right. And they found that the incidence of autism, for example, other common childhood illnesses like asthma, allergies, and other infections are far less. There was another group of pediatric group in the US which did a study comparing the unvaccinated group with the vaccinated group in their practice. And they found that the children that took the vaccines had more incidence of other common illnesses like asthma, chest infections, than the ones that were unvaccinated. And I think in this situation, parents have a right to make a decision of what is best for the child. We haven't proved conclusively is the vaccines in any way, or its products, not necessarily the vaccine. We need to understand when you get a vaccine, an injectable vaccine in particular, you're getting it with all its other ingredients, its preservatives like thimerosal, which is a mercury ingredient, And we don't know to what extent this is implicated in the causality of autism. And that for me is a concern. I mean, I don't know if anybody's seen an autistic child and what that mother goes through. I've seen it. It's dreadful. It's lifelong imprisonment because that mother cannot go out. That mother's got to watch that child. And the biggest fear when you have a severe adverse event is that A, you get no protection because the vaccine industry manufacturers have been granted indemnity, which I think is terribly wrong. In all other drugs, if you make as much as a Panado, and if there's a side effect, and if there's something that, if it's lethal, the drug company can be held accountable.
So
But in the
just
case of
repeat
the
that.
vaccine,
Sorry, Doctor. Yeah, because this for me, I was not aware about this. So you saying that the vaccine manufacturers are indemnified. So who granted them this indemnity? Because this is very, very concerning. So then they can be taken to task. They can be sued legally. They can be a class action against them. I think this is very important for the public and for parents to know this, because this is fraught with huge dangers. In Are there some examples that you can provide us with?
yes. Well, the whole thing about indemnity, I don't know why the US is a leader. As far as I'm concerned, they're not a leader in anything, not even in health. And I'm saying this very confidently because I see the kind of medicine they practice. I mean, the average GP consultation in the US for $500 is 3 minutes, and that's not the benchmark for medicine for me. But anyhow, I detract, I apologize, but was in 1980 that Richard Nixon gave vaccine manufacturers a free wheel, in other words, indemnity. In other words, if they produced a vaccine and if there was a side effect, they and no matter how serious it is, they were indemnified for any liability. And from 1980, you can imagine, from 6 vaccines, the American child, by the time he's 18, gets 60 vaccines. How many of them are really necessary? And the danger about indemnifying the manufacturer is this: they do not have to go through the rigorous trial that is expected before a vaccine is unleashed on the public. And that can take up to 15, 20 years to prove whether the vaccine is safe and effective and not dangerous. So what has happened is that with COVID, within a matter of 3 months, you had a vaccine being delivered. I mean, if you take the COVID vaccine, it was the Omicron vaccine. The Omicron vaccine was a bivalent vaccine, which is quite stupid because you had an old vaccine combined with a new vaccine. When a virus has been out and done and finished, why do you want to vaccinate against it and run the risk of the side effect? But then the Omicron vaccine is a very peculiar one and very shockingly approved vaccine because they tried it on 8 mice, the Omicron 2 vaccine. All 8 vaccines died, and yet the FDA saw fit to pass it. So, I mean, this was really outrageous. I need one epidemiologist to justify the use of that vaccine. And in any event, at that time when that vaccine was released, Omicron was such a safe virus. It saved the world, not the vaccine. If anybody tells you that the vaccine saved the world from the COVID virus, I mean, they're talking through their nostrils.
So,
Because at
doctor,
that
what I
time,
need to understand is, even in school, in history, and when you focus on medical history, vaccines have been credited for the decline in mortality, morbidity. If they say, I mean, polio is all but eradicated due to vaccination. You touched on the smallpox one, where, I mean, he stumbled and said it was through a cow. I'm just going back to my school and my learning in terms of from the cow, and that's how they found the immunity. So we were told, when studying history of vaccines and medical history, in terms of the decline and also eradicating such type of diseases, has been accredited to vaccines. I know even in very, very underprivileged, under-resourced countries, I'm thinking of Afghanistan. There's a 5 years ago, there was a huge vaccination drive for the polio there as well. So h- can you please comment on this then? If the vaccines are for declining this, then um, what is your comment regarding this claim?
Yeah, I think it's a bit over the top to say vaccines decrease mortality, because if you look back at it, the vaccines really came into full swing around about the 50s. And at that time, well, and whatever high mortality that you had amongst children or in public in general, we did not have good sanitation. We did not have good water works. Our sewage system was not dealt with. If you look at back in the early 1900s, when there weren't vehicles, there were horses and carts. There were a couple of tons of stools from these horses and cows that went on the streets. They weren't properly, but we've done away with all that. After the 50s, when we had good sanitation, good purification of water, that was a major concern. I mean, we have cholera outbreaks. We don't go around poking and jabbing everybody with a cholera vaccine. We make sure we purify the water. So I think too much of credit is given to the vaccines. Maybe they have contributed, but there are no studies to prove that vaccines were entirely responsible. Because when polio was eradicated completely in the U.S. Back in the 1980s, it was only about 80% who got the polio oral vaccine, and the rest of it didn't get affected. We don't see another incident of the polio of incidents of polio. And well, there's another very controversial issue. During the time when the polio vaccine was introduced, there was a time when DDT was introduced as well. I think we need to bear this in mind and in context. DDT was used to prevent malaria and to spread around the crops. Was found during that time when DDT was spread, it was a dangerous toxin. It was a dangerous toxin, and it caused a paralysis that was very similar to polio. So at the time, if you had a high incidence of polio when DDT was around, you couldn't tell whether this was due to poliovirus or due to the DDT, but it was stopped. The poliovac the DDT was stopped. I think it was in the 60s, and thereafter we saw a decline in a number of polio cases. So one cannot say conclusively that polio was the cause. Then we need to know about the polio vaccine. When Salk, there was a Dr. Salk in 1955 introduced it. He introduced the live vaccine. It was the active form, and they found that there was a few incidents of polio as a result of that vaccine. With a result, they stopped it, and then there was a guy called I think it was Dr. Sabin in 1961 introduced the oral vaccine. It was an attenuated. It was a live virus, but it was not as lethal as the original one. But there too, they found that it did not last as long. So I think, for all intents and purposes, probably we're done with polio. I'm not saying don't take the polio vaccine. I think we need more research on it. I, as a doctor, am not trained well in vaccines, and most doctors aren't. And nobody, you get this comment or a rider. We're not here to tell you about safety and dangers. Go and ask your doctor. I think we need to understand in med school the only thing doctors are taught about vaccines is when to use it. They're not taught how it is being tested, what are the ingredients, what are the side effects, what are the recourse that should be taken should there be an adverse side effect. So but I made it my business to learn what I was not taught, and I think I'm pretty familiar. And when I wouldn't say I'm hesitant. I'm not going to outrightly say, go ahead and take this vaccine, because should there be an incident of sudden infant death syndrome or an ADHD or, God forbid, autism or a serious adverse event, who takes responsibility? And I think what I'm concerned about the education department, when they make a blanket rule like this, who is going to take a responsibility when there's a serious adverse event? Somebody's got to take accountability for it. And does the education department have the resources to provide alternative sources of education for that child? And what's it going to cost? As it is, There's a stipend of 1,800 rands a month, which is not sufficient to look after a child with autism because that child can't go to an ordinary school. We don't have enough schools for autism children with autism at the moment. I'm not saying that vaccines cause it, but I think we need to be cautious. And I think we need to wait for the HSS report. And for the moment, when there is a doubt in any situation, even health or whatever, we should not go gung-ho and say, go ahead. You need solid evidence to back anything you do. You need to come out conclusively and state that this is safe and nothing will happen to your child. If you cannot say that, I think parents have a legitimate right to say, sorry, I'm not taking the risk with my child taking the vaccine. The other thing I need to state, there's such a big hoo-ha about infectious diseases and viruses and so on. When we talk about those infections in the 50s, we didn't have good antibiotics. In 1980, when we had the Spanish flu, you know what was the biggest cause of death? It was not the virus or the flu. It was a bacterial infection that caused the pneumonia. And at that time in 1918, we didn't have good antibiotics. But from the 1950s, we had things like penicillin. Today, we've got 5 or 6 very good broad spectrum antibiotics that can treat the complications. So when you get these so-called pro-vaxxers, and I need to put a big question mark about pro-vaxxers because a lot of these epidemiologists, virologists who go gung-ho coming on your radio station saying how wonderful these vaccines are, they are highly conflicted. They write reports for the pharmaceutical companies that manufacture these vaccines and skew the benefits in favor of the vaccine manufacturer. And this has been made blatantly obvious during the COVID vaccine. They said it was safe and effective. It was neither safe nor effective. We've had thousands of deaths from myocarditis, neurological deficits, Guillain-Barré syndrome, premature deliveries, miscarriages, deaths, cardiac deaths, and young people getting clots. And that has put a big question mark. Shouldn't we be? I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using these vaccines. I'm saying they should be tested. We need more conclusive evidence. And I think we need to recognize our constitutional right. In Section 12.2.c of our Constitution guarantees every individual in South Africa the right to refuse if they feel uncertain. And the duty of a vaccinator is A, to know the vaccine, to know its contents, to explain to the person receiving the vaccine what is contained in this vaccine, what are the side effects, and what is the recourse, what is the remedial action. Now you have a situation, somebody dies. There's no remedial action. How do you compensate somebody? These are questions that the Department of Education needs to answer, and they cannot make it compulsory. And if they do, there's another act in the Education Act. By imposing a rule like this, you are depriving that child a right to education, which is a constitutional right. If you feel that child is not fit to come to one of your schools because they were not vaccinated, you've got to find the means to provide alternative sources of education. And for heaven's sake, if that child is not vaccinated, how is it going to affect the rest of the children? This rubbish about saying that we want you to get vaccinated so you will protect me is absolute rubbish. If a vaccine is so safe, so effective, why do I need you to be vaccinated not to infect me? If anything, it should affect you.
So, Dr.
So that was
Rapiti,
a lot of, yeah.
let us leave it there. I've got the People's Law Activist, Advocate Sibanda, joining us, and let us then focus on exactly what you said in terms of our right to education, our constitutional right, and the right of parents to make informed choices regarding their children's health and education. Thank you so much. It was really, really eye-opening and
Can I
informative
just
for me. Yes, you can conclude.
I just want to make a closing statement. I'm not against a vaccine. I'm not an anti-vaccine, but I am a scientist. There's a difference. You see, I'm not the sheep that follows authority. I'm an intelligent guy, I think, that questions, and good doctors question science. They're not afraid to challenge it. And if we're going to be sensitive enough, I think what should be the situation is you have a right to a choice. It should not be compulsory, and that should not be a predictive or predicative factor that whether you should enter. Every child should have a right, and no principal should ask you for your vaccination card. That is your decision, and the education department has no power over that parent, because that parent is thinking about the well-being of the child. It's an insult to say to that child, you're being reckless, because our parents are being well-read, and COVID has opened their eyes, and they were acting in the best interests of their children. So give us our right, protect our constitutional rights, and give us the freedom to exercise that right without prejudice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rapiti, for that sage advice in making us aware, creating this awareness. Much appreciated. We're going to go for a short break. When we come back, let's look at the legal implications and what is our right and what can we do for our children to make informed decisions for their health and their educational future. All this after the break.
Okay. I'll have to switch off now. And if you're hearing me,
Yes.
hello.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Welcome back. You tuned into Salam Media, and this is a very fascinating, interesting discussion we're having regarding the mandatory or compulsory vaccinations that now the department requires as an entry for education. And joining me, we've spoken at length to Dr. Rapiti regarding his scientific concerns about the vaccination, regarding knowing how safe the vaccines are for your children and what are the vaccines comprised of, what are the side effects, and how to make informed choices. But then comes a lot of legal questions, constitutional questions, which are enshrined in our constitution and guaranteed a right to education. So, in terms of compulsory vaccines a must before you can get access to education, actually I think impedes on one's right, a child's right to free education or child's right to education. So joining us is he's known as the people's law activist, and that is advocate Sibanda. And I'm going to ask him to help me unpack this growing clash between parents' constitutional rights and the state's desire to expand its authority in the upbringing and medical choices for children. Thank you for joining us. Advocate Sibana has been listening to the discussion, the medical side of the discussion I was having with Dr. Rapiti. Welcome to Salam Media First, Advocate Sibanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor and indeed a pleasure to be invited to the platform for today.
So tell me, what are your feelings regarding this now a proposal by the department to make it compulsory that children be vaccinated before, an entry, a requirement that a vaccination card needs to be uploaded before children can be then accepted into a formal schooling environment. What are your concerns regarding parents' constitutional rights? And is the state trying to take control over a parent's health and educational right to education and taking over that nurturing aspect now for our children?
Well, thank you so much, Appa, for that question. The issue is very broad in a way, in the sense that what we are witnessing is literally a potential clash between parental rights and overreach in as far as government is concerned. And government literally going in the direction of stripping parents of their responsibility, which responsibility is covered in Section 28 of the Constitution, which basically says that every child has a right to parental care. So now, part of parental care speaks to the medical attention that a child gets. The parent has an obligation to ensure that, first and foremost, being the primary caregiver to their child, they do everything to project, facilitate, advocate for, and advance the best interests of their children. And that obligation is also upon government. But now government is coming in and wanting to take that responsibility away from the parents in as far as the health of the children is concerned and in as far as the education of the children is concerned. Because the Children's Act is very, very clear that parents have an obligation to make sure that their children go to school or they get an education. So now government is now putting a condition. One of the things that we have to be clear about here, the core fundamental, if I were to answer your question in one sentence, would be to say education is unconditional, whereas medical intervention is subject to consent. So what government is basically now saying to the parents is that we're taking over your responsibility as parents in as far as the best interest of the child is concerned, where medicine is concerned. And in taking that away from you, we are deciding that now we are making access to education conditional, and conditional upon proof of immunization. So basically, what is happening here is that the government is imposing an unconstitutional provision in as far as education is concerned. Or rather, put it differently, the regulations that have been proposed by the Minister of Basic Education seek to impose a condition which condition is of itself in violation of the Constitution, because the Constitution is clear, case law is clear, that access to education is unconditional. So now the parents are being put in a very difficult position in that they are now expected to comply with this regulation that the minister wants to see through. But having said that, the minister may argue and say, well, we've made provision, Section 14 or Regulation 14 of the proposed regulations also covers the possibility that parents may apply for exemption. That sounds nice in its own way. And the three grounds basically that parents may apply for exemption is religious grounds, it's cultural grounds, or it's medical grounds. So now you then have this funny scenario where the person responsible for adjudicating or analyzing and therefore deciding whether exemption should be granted or not is the head of Department of Education. We are not told what the qualifications of this particular individual are for them to be able to make a determination based on medical grounds, religious grounds, or cultural grounds. So we have a scenario now where a parent may have a legitimate concern due to the health of their child. They approach a medical practitioner who is registered with the HPCSA, which is the Health Practitioners Council of South Africa, basically an allopathic doctor. So now, once they approach that particular individual and that doctor motivates that definitely the child should not be immunized and indicates their basic reason in the motivation, it's the HOD now who decides whether the doctor has a valid point or not. Where is the logic in that? Where does the HOD have the ability to contradict what a doctor has basically said in motivation of why a child should not be vaccinated? So that in itself is just some other bureaucratic route that government is trying to introduce, which, as we saw with COVID, that when the so-called vaccine came onto the world stage, we had again the three grounds: religion, culture, and medical grounds as the basis upon which people could apply for exemption. And the ultimate deciders as to whether exemption should be granted or not were bosses in offices who knew absolutely nothing about the medicinal side of what is being proposed and the reasons why. And in some cases, they had doctors who would come and support their conclusions in as far as the refusals to grant exemption. And needless to say, Dr. Rapiti has already touched on it. A lot of these so-called doctors, I say so-called because some of them, you really wonder what exactly they are talking to, actually just supported the companies. They never examined the patient. They never had the case history of that particular individual. And they turn around and say, no, this is safe and effective. This individual must take the jab. But in this case now with the HOD, it's even more ridiculous because now you're asking an educational bureaucrat to take a decision on issues of health and therefore can contradict a medical practitioner. Doesn't make sense. And then now on the cultural side and the religious side, the HOD has to determine whether this is a valid religious practice or not. This is a valid cultural practice or not. This is something that basically one can prove that they have been practicing for a long time, however long time that is. So it means now there is no one who can today get into a particular religion and then tomorrow say, well, I believe in this now, and it means because this is what my religion says, I cannot allow myself or my child to take this vaccination. Say, no, you haven't been long enough, so we'll say the HOD. But how is he going or she going to determine that? Even culture, how long do you have to practice a particular culture before the HOD can come to a point of saying you are now at a stage where you can be exempted? How about the constitutional right to conscience, to religion, to culture? Where do those go?
Advocate Sibanda, what we're going to do is before we go for break, I'm going to leave you with some a question. As parents, then how do we as a collective oppose this? And what can we do in terms of our rights that are enshrined in the Constitution and including our children's right to education? And how can we as parents then say we want to take responsibility and responsible choices and decisions that are in the best interest for our children? So I'm leaving you with those questions. We'll go for a short break and then we'll await your response. Thank you, Advocate.
Thank you.
Penny Appeal's Education First campaign helps children to get access to quality education.
I'm 14 years old. When I grow up, I'd like to be a scientist.
We believe every child belongs at school,
And we want education, a better education.
learning and dreaming their way to a better future. With your help, we can provide classrooms, desks, stationery packs, and school shoes. Help make these dreams a reality. Visit www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, bakkies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
You South African, of course. You anxious about the future. We've got you covered. Build on your wealth portfolio with Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange. Visit us at 151 Stephen Dlamini Road, Musgrave, Durban, or call us on 031-202-4700 for more information. Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty.
Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, and that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
It's a new beginning. It's a new era. Salam Media. Humanitarian journalism.
Welcome back. You tuned into Salam Media with me, your host today on the Mid-Morning Show, Mariam Mia, and I'm in conversation with the People's Law activist, that is Advocate Sibanda, and we are discussing our rights when it comes to protecting our children and making informed medical choices for our children, informed choices regarding their health, and being proactive as well. And this is against the backdrop of mandatory vaccinations that are now being proposed from the department. That means if your child wants to enter formal education system, the education systems under the auspices of the Department of Education, one of the requirements will be to forward proof that your children have received the mandatory vaccinations from birth up to 6 years old. So there are some mandatory, and then there's the optional ones as well. And Dr. Sibanda is saying that that is department overreach. We should be making informed choices. And before we went to the break, I asked him, what do we do as parents in terms of our rights, and also how can we then communicate and fight for this right as parents? So welcome back, Dr. Advocate Sibanda, and we'll have your response.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Thank you. The starting point in any sort of action that one wants to take or has to take is firstly arming yourself with knowledge. In this particular instance, it's necessary for parents to get to know their constitutional rights, where the Constitution clearly allows for their children to be unconditionally educated, in the sense that they can access education without the government placing conditions. Further to that, it's important for parents to get to know and familiarize themselves with Section 6 of the National Health Act. That is one of the most important acts. Actually, this is for everyone, really, which speaks to the fact that before any medical intervention can be performed, or any medication or whatever can be done, a person is entitled in law to have informed choice by way of informed consent. So now, to be able to do that, the practitioner who wants to inject you or inject your child has an obligation in law to tell you exactly what it is that they want to inject into the child. According to the regulations the minister has put out, there is no provision at all for the parents to exercise their right to informed consent, which is also protected constitutionally. Like Dr. Rapiti spoke to, Section 12.2 of the Constitution speaks clearly about bodily integrity, speaks clearly about informed consent. So it's necessary for parents to familiarize themselves with that, and also to appreciate the fact that the South African Schools Act also specifically says that children must be at school, and the role of the minister is to ensure that children have access to education. But what is happening now is contrary to that. So now, given the context of the regulations that the minister has put out, my plea to every parent out there, to every grandparent, auntie, uncle, and prospective parents, write to the minister. The public has been asked to comment. And in commenting, indicate to the minister your misgivings about these regulations. If indeed you have misgivings, if you support the regulations and you want government to take charge of raising your children and deciding what goes into your children's bodies, then that's a choice that is also available to you. I'm not here to decide for you what your choice should be. I'm just telling you that from a legal perspective, you have a right to say no as much as you have a right to say yes. So if you take the view that you need your rights protected in as far as the basic rights contained in the laws, because even the Consumer Protection Act is very, very clear that people must know what exactly the products that they are getting are. But government in this particular approach is denying the people that particular opportunity. So now the cutoff date for sending comments to the minister is the 5th of September, which is next week, Friday. If you get onto the People's Lawctivist YouTube channel, just as you see on the screen, the People's Lawctivist, just enter that on YouTube. You will find there a playlist of videos that speaks to this particular issue. And video number 3 actually takes you through how to comment, what to comment about, what constitutes a proper comment as against a comment that will end up being thrown out of the window. And it also goes through a form that will help you to have direction as to how to proceed going forward. That form is also available by sending an email to admin@lawctivistalliance.org. So that those avenues will help you with the action part as to how to proceed going forward. But what I'm also coming across is that there are some communities that have reached out to say, we would like to comment, as we have heard that there is a process going on, but we don't understand English. This thing has only been communicated in English. So now, how can the minister rule us out in this particular process? Whereas the truth of the matter is that the English-speaking part of the population represents less than 9% of South Africans. And even within that 9%, the language in which it has been written is such that even native English speakers, except those who are exposed to the law, to activism or whatever, will not have access to it. So it means almost 99% of the population cannot have access, because either their language has been left out, or they could be blind people. It has not been put in Braille. It could be people who need sign language, which is one of the official languages. It could be people who speak any one of the Khoi and the San languages, and they're also not represented in this whole communication model. So now the people have to express that to the minister, though I am aware that there are some who are already pushing for the minister to facilitate a process where these so-called regulations are put in a language that they can relate to and a language that they can understand. Because again, constitutionally, you have to be communicated within a language you understand.
So,
And you should.
Advocate Silva, sorry to come in here, but now you raised a very important point for me as well is, some parents are not educated enough to even understand the constitutional and what are their rights enshrined in the Constitution. So I'm looking at in under-resourced areas or areas where parents are not as educated and armed with information. And like you say, the language barrier as well, because this was put in English and even that type of English and that. So some parents might not even be aware that, you can oppose this. You don't have to accept it, because maybe in they strive to provide education for the child as a means of hope, as a means of opportunity. You are going to say, okay, if my child wasn't vaccinated, go to the nearest clinic, just make sure they're vaccinated, because this is the requirement and I need my child to have entry into an education, because education is opportunity. So they might just comply without even knowing that they don't have to comply if they're feeling uncomfortable or if they don't have enough knowledge. So they might be not well versed or not aware in terms of the process, but that doesn't mean they're not educated in their own space regarding the children. So they might be opposed to it, but they might not know. So also that can also be brought up as an important discussion, along with this just being changed into so it's English is there. So in terms of the other 10 official languages. So my point is then to extend it not only to say this is what the department is proposing, but it also should be followed up with this is your rights. And if you're uncomfortable, this is your avenue how you comment. And also a platform to comment. So what you're saying is important, but I think it needs to, if you're creating awareness, then it needs to be taken a step further to include that you have a platform to object.
Absolutely. That's why, for instance, tomorrow night we'll be in Somerset West at the Life Shine Wellness Center, where we'll be speaking to these exact same issues and highlighting to the people what the implications behind what's going on is and how to go forward. And then on Wednesday afternoon, we'll be at Crossroads, just in next to Nyanga Township. And I'm thankful for a station like Sala Media that has basically taken it upon itself to say if the issues affecting our communities need to be voiced out, you've opened the space so that people can hear, so that people can know. Because what is basically happening in as far as this language thing is concerned, it's a violation of Section 9 of the Constitution, which speaks to unfair discrimination. Why is my language discriminated against? Why is English the only language that the minister seems to feel should be the language that is communicated with to the people? How about every other language? Indeed, you are so correct. The people who are illiterate. That is why we're going into the townships to go and talk to the people. Next week we'll be in Kaelicha as well. Sunday we'll be in Nortuk. And there's some other radio stations that have also indicated an interest for interviews. So now, if the non-mainstream media is what is taking the message out there, why is the mainstream media quiet? Why is the mainstream media not educating people on this very, very important
So I'd
subject?
like to think that Salam Media punches above our weight, and I think we're very much now in the mainstream, although our narrative might be different. And it's a narrative of choice. It's a narrative that, so it's anything from what's happening in terms of human rights atrocities around the globe, marginalized, under-resourced. So whatever it is like this. So it's not a position that we are pro-vaccination or anti-vaccination, and that it's every person has a right to make an informed decision based
Absolutely.
on awareness and education. And I think this is Salam Media's platform, that we provide the platform for people to have discussions around issues that affect themselves, their children, and also by having these informed, important, essential discussions, we make our society a more positive, progressive society where people can make informed choices for their families and for their well-being. So this is not about being anti-vaccination or pro-vaccination, but parents and people have enough information to make their own informed decisions regarding all aspects of their life. So I'd like to correct you in where I feel we are very much in the mainstream, and with the advent of social media and various platforms, I think even somebody like yourself now and your YouTube channel is out there in the mainstream, and I think it's important because I think it's important. I just have Fatima Abdul saying respect to Salam Media, and thank you to Advocate Sabelo, because I think it's and I think that's so wonderful about the technology and the online platforms is there's a lot more awareness there, and there's a lot more support here, that a lot more support that's happening. And somebody saying here, double standards, and parents of illegal immigrants are not required to supply any vaccination documentation or any other documentation. Yes, so the thing is, there might be a broader issue. There might be a broader issue why the department is bringing in compulsory vaccinations, which is a discussion for another time, but at least we got the discussion going, and parents know there's a platform, and this is available on Salam Media YouTube. This discussion will be available. And as you say, we go to your People's Law Activists on your YouTube channel. There is a link there where parents can put up comments, and you are on a roadshow in the Western Cape, and people can follow this. And I think there are many good discussion groups, Facebook, WhatsApp groups regarding this. So I think there'll be lots of valid engagements with the minister and department. And Marlene says this overreach by government should be stopped. Parents are lawful guardians of their children. No child should be forced to take a vax to have an education. And she further says solution. Yeah, she's saying homeschool your children. There's lots to talk about, but time is up. I have my next guest waiting. So thank you, and I'm sure we'll get you on again. Thanks so much for this very, very enlightening, informative, insightful discussion to yourselves and Dr. Rapiti. With this, we're going to go for a short break, and then I'm going to introduce my next guest.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure.